Can everybody hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. We were having a little issue with recording, but we're able to start recording. So I'm going to go ahead and make it live, and all of our attendees will be able to see and hear us, or see the screen and hear us. So.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chelsea Lewis, and I'm Juvenile Law Center's Communications Associate. First, thank you for joining today's webinar called The Implementation of Act 91, Successes and Challenges. This webinar is hosted by Kacey Mordecai of Juvenile Law Center. Our panelists today include Leah Ayer-Caswell from Adams County Children and Youth Services, Leah Weingartner from Valley Youth House, Marisa McClellan from the Dauphin County Solicitor, Leah Cullen from Kids Voice, and we have Juvenile Law Center's youth advocates, Bruce and Jasmine, here with us today. Before I go any further, I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. So if you could please use the chat box and just give me a heads up on whether or not you can hear me. Okay. Looks like, yes, looks like I'm coming in loud and clear. Thank you for that. So I just want to run through some technical issues. This webinar is being recorded, and we will send a link with the video recording plus any other supporting materials in a follow-up email in a few days. If you're participating by phone today, your line will be muted during the entire webinar. If you have any questions during the webinar or have any technical difficulties, you can alert us by typing your question into that questions box or chat box that you just used. And so by now you are all familiar with the GoToWebinar control panel, which is that long rectangle to the right of your screen. If you'd like to minimize that rectangle, there is a small orange button with an arrow, and you can click that to collapse it or expand it. We'll try to save some time today for to answer any of your questions. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Kacey.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the 3rd anniversary of Act 91, and we're celebrating it with this webinar and 2 videos that Juvenile Law Center produced this year. And I know a lot of you are familiar with Act 91, but I wanted to give you a little bit of the basic background. So Act 91, as we're celebrating the 3rd anniversary, it was passed in July of 2012, and it implemented the federal foster and connections law in Pennsylvania, meaning that youth now have the opportunity to stay in care after age 18. So not just if they were enrolled in a course of treatment or instruction, but youth had the flexibility now of being in school, they could be working, or they could qualify under the exception if the youth had a behavioral health or medical condition that prevented them from meeting one of the other criteria. So Act 91 also allows youth to re-enter care before turning age 21. So I'm just going to forward the slide here, which has the criteria on it, which you guys can read for yourself. But the goal of Hopefully it's advancing now. So the goal of the law really is to provide youth with extended opportunities between the ages and support and chances for permanency between the ages of 18 to 21. So to celebrate the spirit of the law, we produced these 2 videos, and you can find them on Juvenile Law Center's YouTube site, which there's a link to it on our homepage. So the 2 new videos feature our youth advocates. It talks about making the decision to remain in care and weighing the pros and cons of that. It talks about youth goals at 18 and what kind of conversations they'd like to have about making the transition to adulthood. So we've got a packed agenda today, but in addition to celebrating the promise of Act 91 with the videos especially, we also wanted at Juvenile Law Center to take a look at the implementation of the law. What does it practically look like across the state? We don't only want to celebrate what we're doing well, but we want to take a look at what folks are working on across the country and think about next steps and how we can implement some of the best practices across the state. So I'm sure you'll be inspired by our panelists and we'll get ideas from them. Thank you to all of you who provided feedback through our survey. We identified some really consistent themes and topics, and we selected age and developmentally appropriate placements for older youth and engaging older youth through opportunities provided by Act 91. So this is definitely the start of a conversation, and we look forward to hearing your feedback and comments on this. So I'm going to hand it over to our panelists. Leah Ayer-Caswell is up first from Adams County, and she's going to be starting the conversation about age and developmentally appropriate placement. So this is obviously one of the more practical concerns about Act 91, youth want, if they want to stay in care and want to be recognized as an adult, what kind of placements are we providing for them to make sure that we still balance their desire for independence with the need to provide them with opportunities for support. So without further ado, I'm going to put it over to Leah.
Hi, this is Lisa Ayer-Caswell. I'm here in Adams County, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I am our independent living supervisor here at the agency, and we have been able to offer unlicensed supervised independent living placements to our youth who are 18 and older and choose to remain in care, or if they've resumed care. So we actually have 2 apartments that we lease under the county, and we use those apartments for those placements, at least for them to start out. And then as they progress and feel comfortable, they are able to transition to their own apartment under their own lease while we continue to provide them with a placement subsidy. We also have a relationship with our local housing authority where we have a preference policy so that our youth are able to go to the top of the wait list to get a housing choice voucher. And that voucher is available to them. They can apply within 6 months of their planned discharge. So they can actually start using that voucher and start the step-down process 6 months before they leave care. That way they'll be in their own apartment and have their own lease and still have some assistance as they transition to totally being independent. So this has been working out really well for us. We do find that some of our youth who are interested in SIL placement, once they get closer to it, they do kind of feel uneasy and uncertain about living on their own. So we find that having our own apartment where we take care of most of the costs and the bills and can provide them with more close supervision and support initially has been helpful for them in their transition to getting their own apartment. We also do allow them to have a roommate if they get their own apartment, so that helps in some of those cases as well. We also use our independent living apartments for our aftercare youth. So when youth age out or leave care when they're 18 or older, they can come back to us if they're experiencing difficulties. So if they find themselves homeless or they're living in an unsafe or unhealthy situation, we have emergency shelter for them for up to 10 days, 9 nights, and then they can transition into our transitional housing program, which would provide them with housing for up to 90 days, and there are some exceptions to that we can extend that if they're doing well and just unable to locate their own housing. So with that being said, as far as some of the things that we have found helpful in starting up our housing program and also having support for our older youth, we actually got startup funds from the community, from some local trusts, to start up the program so that we were able to show our county commissioners and our agency administrator the need for the program before we were asking for permanent funding for that program and for that housing. We also have found it very helpful to have community partners. We have an independent living advisory council, which consists of those people in the community who support our life skills instruction class. So they meet with us once every other month to hear what's going on with our independent living program and hear the challenges that our youth might be facing. And they also support an annual banquet for our youth and some other fundraising opportunities. So we have some monies to provide to the youth once they're no longer eligible for independent living funds. We also have a women's initiative from the Purse of United Way, and those ladies helped us start up our mentoring program, so becoming mentors for our youth, and they also host an annual Purse auction, which also raises money for our program and supports our youth. Some of our other partners are Phi Delta Theta of Gettysburg College, and these young men have done a haunted mansion for us the last 9 years as a fundraiser, and more recently have begun to do group mentoring with our youth. So sometimes we do not have enough mentors, especially for our males, to match them individually. So these young men come to us once a month and provide activities and support and spend time with our youth. in a group setting. And finally, we also have a formal partnership with our local Fraternal Order of Eagles. And they've done 2 golf tournaments with us, and they have also provided us with some additional funding to cover some of the costs that our grant can't handle. So finally, I would just recommend that if you can have your youth speak to the supervisors at your agency, to have them speak with the agency administrator and the caseworkers, we found that to be very, very helpful. We recently held a retreat for our family support and independent living staff, and we had former youth come and speak about their transition, about what permanency looked like for them, shared all the things that worked for them, the things that were barriers for them, and our staff really asked for more of that. They wanted to hear from more youth. They felt that was like the most helpful thing we were able to provide to them. So that's really all I had specifically, but I'd be happy to answer any questions at the end of the webinar if you have them.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. I did mention earlier that we have 2 of our Juvenile Law Center's youth advocates here. We have Bruce and Jasmine, who are also stars of our videos. And so I know they've been frantically taking notes and have a couple of things they may want to add to this discussion, which goes along with your theme of talking with the youth and encouraging them to speak to staff. Do you guys have anything that you want to add?
I just wanted to say, hi everybody, my name is Bruce Morgan. I just wanted to add that, like, being aware of the age of the youth and, you know, having those conversations where the youth will eventually age out of placement or care, and just taking the proper precautions and letting them know, like, what comes next earlier rather than later.
Anything you want to add, Jess? So, Lisa, I don't know if you just have any tips or anything for people who may be listening about how to implement some of those kind of housing options within their counties.
I think that just building those relationships with your administrators and with the county commissioners to make sure that they understand the purpose of doing it, and making sure that they have the opportunity to have questions answered. I guess the other piece that I didn't mention is that we were able to form a collaboration with a local real estate agency who is providing life skills instruction to our youth about, you know, leasing their own apartment and what to look for and avoid. And so we had that standing relationship with that landlord who was actually able to connect us with landlords in the community who were willing to rent to us, knowing that we'd be renting to young people, or that we would not be renting to them, but that we'd be providing the apartments to young people in the community, and so that they would have some background and understand the importance of having this service available to them, and knowing that they weren't going to be able to provide any kind of references because they don't have that background yet. So just that was really important because, you know, we don't expect our youth to be perfect, and it gives us an opportunity to work through any problems that arise, and the landlords have been very supportive and understanding of that. So that's another piece, just that communication, getting out there and educating the community and the commissioners, I think is really vital.
Great, thank you. And I think we're just going to move along to Lisa Weingartner, who is the Regional Director for Independent Living at Valley Youth House. And I'm going to...
Are you ready for me to start?
all right, I'm getting your PowerPoint ready to go for you, Lisa.
Sure.
Are you the initial slide there?
I don't see it yet, but...
Okay.
There you go. Thanks. So I'm Lisa Weingartner. I'm the Regional Director for Valley Youth House's independent living programs in the Northeast and the central part of Pennsylvania. And I was asked to speak about appropriate placements for older youth and just kind of the I don't know, secrets or tricks of that trade, and how do you really operationalize those SIL type programs. So if you want to go ahead and flip to the first slide, or the second slide. So when you see the first slide coming up here, you're going to see a bunch of, I guess I'll call them like those buzzwords that people talk about a lot. The first is really program culture and positive youth development and trauma-informed care. But as I was thinking about speaking about this, I couldn't do it without talking about really the culture of the agency and the culture of the program. If you don't have that in place, you're really going to struggle in really running an SIL or a TLR, transitional living residence. Because youth really need the freedom and the opportunity, and they really need the voice in the programming. So that's why I just kept coming back to it, and why I made it a whole slide to itself. So real quick, when I think about operationalizing positive youth development, I really think about four key parts of that: safety, control, connectedness, and opportunity. Could you guys try and advance the slide?
I'm trying right now. I apologize to our audience.
That's okay. So when I'm thinking positive youth development, I'm really thinking youth having a real voice in program implementation and program structure, which includes them helping us interview new staff or staff that are coming on board. Really, if we're struggling with an expectation or a rule that youth can't seem to, it's just not working out, we then will ask for their real feedback and what we should be doing. But the other piece is safety. So not just the physical safety of the location of the site or their own rooms or just having space where they're comfortable, but also safety in the relationship with the staff they're working with. And that changes. If you have different kids coming in and moving out, you could have a youth who's maybe more of a bully, or youth who aren't comfortable sharing their sexuality with their housemates. So really being attuned to safety all the time, not just when the youth first comes in. And then control. So it's the youth's plan, and we all know that, but oftentimes what can happen is it's the plan we write and the youth agrees to. So you have to be really careful that in the rush to get everything done, you're not just writing a plan for the youth. Ideally, I think you should have the youth presenting their own plan, and if you're working on that relationship, be able to challenge things that don't seem quite accurate. For example, I want to graduate high school, but I'm skipping school 4 days a week. There may be real reasons why the school is being skipped, but we have to address those. Just like we don't want the youth to say yes to us, I don't want the staff to be just agreeing with the youth if they're seeing some real challenges in the plan that's being put forward. Connection, even if we're not thrilled with who the youth wants to be connected with, that's still their absolute right and choice. I find that is often the case when we're talking about past family that maybe, there we go. So we're under positive youth development, safety control, and connectedness is the third one down there. I find that connection with past family members who have maybe not been the best persons in that youth's lives, that often challenges staff and county caseworkers because I think generally people want to really protect youth, but the reality is the youth need to make some of those decisions on their own, and we don't always really know what's best for them. So allowing them those opportunities to make connections with people from their past, and then of course supporting them in finding new connections through SWAN services and other methods. Mentoring, as Lisa mentioned, are really important. And then, of course, the opportunities that you can offer the youth. Not just the opportunity to learn things or to have real successes like speaking for the Youth Advisory Board, but also the behavioral opportunities that are sometimes real failures. So that they went out and experimented with drugs, that they were in a relationship that was really brought them down for a while. I often think back to my own life learning, and I think most of us can recognize that we learn a lot more from our failures than we do from our successes. So really allowing the kids the opportunity to succeed and to fail so that they live those lessons themselves. And then there's the whole trauma-informed piece, which is really about recognizing the youth's history and respecting it, identifying their struggles with them initially. So if I have a youth who's come in with history of drug and alcohol use, we're really talking about that from the beginning. Would it be helpful if we did random urine screens? Many kids will say, yes, that would be helpful for me. Or, you know, we notice you've struggled when you're reconnected with your mom. How should we plan for those times? But really being honest, and then building on the youth's strengths. So when the youth is doing really well, working in school, building good relationships, staff will often be like, it's really good, it's going really well. Next kid? No, let's help the youth identify what's going so well so that they can come back to those things when they're in a moment that they're struggling in. And I don't think that's anything different than what we do ourselves and with our own kids. The other piece, the element of pursuit, I really have to give my staff credit for raising this to a PowerPoint presentation, because what they have really said is we have to earn these kids' trust. We need to trust them right off the bat, and with most of the programs I say to the kids, I trust you. Coming in the door, I trust you. But they don't need to trust us. We have to earn that. And oftentimes that means we need to pursue them a little bit, demonstrate that we really care about them. Without that, none of the rest of it happens. And then the last piece, which is just, I mentioned at the beginning, is ongoing supervision and training. You have to keep coming back to this stuff because when life is tough and case management needs are demanding and courts are demanding things, it can be easy to fall back into the rut of rigidity, and those things don't work well for this age group. Okay, can we flip the slide? Thanks. In implementing these programs, it's all about risk management and how comfortable you and your administration can become with taking chances. The less rules and the more reality you can be, the better off I think the program will be, the more learning that'll happen, and the more youth will be willing to work with you. Of course, picking your battles. This is the classic battle of we don't allow cigarette smoking. That's all well and good, but if the youth has nowhere to stay, we might need to reconsider that rule. Now, we don't allow cigarette smoking on property, but we'll work around other things. Point 2, can I sleep tonight? That literally is, can me, sleep this evening? That piece comes in primarily when I'm dealing with a youth with a child, so a mother baby or a father baby, making sure that I'm comfortable, that the youth is comfortable asking for help, and that I'm comfortable with their ability to parent and the supports we have around them in order to parent. And I come back to that over and over again, and I have that conversation with the youth. It's not like just an internal question, but it's an actual conversation so that the youth's really a part of that process. And then I often will say, where will the youth be if they're not in the program? If I can't adapt this program to fit the needs of the youth, what are their options? And there may be very little, and sometimes we get to the place where we say, but I'm not sure what I can do to change this program to meet the needs of the youth. But most of the time, it's after months of trying different things, because you really want to give kids the opportunity to make changes. The hard questions are the high-risk behavior, like sexually active with minimal to no responsibility around that. So we're worried about sexually transmitted infections, we're worried about pregnancy, getting into cars with people you don't know, gang involvement, criminal activity, and active drug use or abuse. All of those things are handled on a real individual basis, again, with honest conversations with the youth involved. That first one, sexually active with minimal or no responsibility, is one we probably deal with on a monthly basis. And there are lots of conversations around, here's what I can do for you, with you, here's what I need from you to keep yourself safe. And we're willing to negotiate around it and work with it until we really feel your safety's at risk, and then we will need to look at other options. The normal things, drinking, smoking cigarettes, drug experimentation, dangerous or destructive dating relationships, curfew if they have one, those are pretty, those you have to just work out, because they will, they'll come and go 100 times, and those should hopefully all be things that you can work with through the time the youth is with you. The last slide is the nitty-gritty of implementation. What works, I think I already said this, building youth voice into the program review, making sure you're near supportive services, focusing on self-sustaining the youth, so planning way ahead of time with the youth. Okay, so you're 18, you want to leave when you're 20. Where are you going to live? Let's start saving money. What's your career goal? I can't overstate that. You really need to be thinking way ahead for and with the youth. Not just about what are we eating next week, but what are we eating 3 months from now, or where are we living 3 years from now. Staff count, if you don't have good staff, your program will not be good. And making sure you teach the life skills. You want to do the skill with the youth, you want to watch them do it, you want to confirm they can do it, and you want to keep doing that over and over and over again. And there may be months when you don't have to help them, and then you may need to go back and help them with a skill. You want to make sure you're not being judgmental, because no one's reaching out for help when they feel like they're being judged. Placing your programming close to employment, services, transportation, and supports, I think really increases your success. Making sure you're planning for years to come, including permanent connections and housing options. And the last section was really just about program types, which I think Lisa already discussed. That's all I have. Does anyone have questions, or maybe that comes later?
Great, thank you so much, Lisa. You actually echoed a lot of the points that came up in my discussions with our youth here last week about kind of normal youth behavior, and just not so much about a specific type of placement, but about respecting who the youth are and getting them involved in the process. And we have our youth here, including Bria, who now joined us. So do you guys have anything to add about what age-appropriate placements mean to you?
I just had a quick question.
Lisa, I think Bria has a question for you.
Are there like meetings, weekly meetings for the different programs for the youth?
Yes, so most of those programs, a youth has a life skills counselor, which they would meet with weekly or more than weekly or every other week, depending on their needs. And that schedule is really dictated by the youth and the counselor, like what works for them.
Okay.
Anything else? Bruce?
The risk management part is just a little tricky to me, because, like, how can you really monitor their sexual behavior, things of that sort?
I guess maybe, Lisa, do you have any tips for how to approach that risk management behavior, those kinds of conversations with youth?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The only way you know is by asking and developing an honest relationship with the kids. And I think people could probably be surprised how often that conversation is, you know, you can observe things too. We're going to Planned Parenthood more. We're having a lot of doctor's appointments. we're helping kids get medication, but really it is about, what's going on. Have you had a lot of guys that you're with lately or women that you're with? And just being honest about the concern for safety, and are you protecting yourself? Do you know the people? Like, those conversations are very intense, and that's part of why you have to develop a relationship and a safe relationship, because if you're not doing that, you're going to be coming across as judgmental, and that's not the purpose. The purpose is to help youth be safe and take care of themselves. And we've all done high-risk things, so how do we help you make choices around that?
Right, and I think the concern with our group is definitely making sure that those conversations occur respectfully and where you feel comfortable with you. And I think a lot of your points about building that relationship first make a lot of sense, so that that conversation is the least awkward that it can be.
Right, and it's not a conversation that would happen in a group, and there generally are a team of 3 or 4 people that support the youth, and there's one person that would have that role, not the group of them. So we actually have more of a clinical social work person who has less or more confidentiality, we'll say, so they're not sharing everything with the team. And those are the people that generally have that conversation. Although I'll be honest with you, it's really about who's the youth most comfortable with. And it's not always that person. But you still have to have the conversation if you're worried about the youth safety.
I want to be mindful of time, so I'm going to save, I know some questions are coming in, and I'm going to save them till the end. But I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the second topic that we identified today, engaging older youth through Act 91, because youth can't take advantage of the opportunities that Act 91 provides if they don't know about them, or we don't tell them about them in a way that seems useful to them. And I know a lot of people who gave us feedback had questions about how do we get the message out. We have the videos, which is great, but how do we use them, and how do we make sure that youth understand what we're expecting from them to stay in care between 18 and 21. So I'm going to turn things over to Marisa McClellan, who is a solicitor in Dauphin County, to start us off on that topic.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now, Marisa. Thank
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Hi. Well, it's interesting because I actually had an additional example I wanted to bring up today about this issue. When I had talked to Kacey about it in the past, it's always been a concern for the attorneys in the courtroom and the judge and the hearing examiner, how are older youth being informed about these possibilities. And so we take a great deal of time in court when a youth is getting close to aging out of care to discuss it on the record. We make sure to do that for those hearings. But we've been trying to look for ways in the community to also get the word out. And the concern is that sometimes older youth are in a really desperate situation, which is why they need to come into care. So we've tried to make sure that even local shelters in our area have posters up so that in case a youth is trying to go to a shelter or whatever, they can find that information there. But we wanted it to be more widespread than that and just more common knowledge. So we are trying to look at ways to do that within the Dauphin County area. Even if that's just alerting through our local roundtable, all of the organizations there, hey, can you hang up a poster? Can you talk to older youth that you engage with and just let them know about that, to just kind of get the word out in a smaller scale fashion. But we do really like the videos too. So one thing we've noticed in court is in having those conversations with youth, they don't quite always understand there are multiple ways for them to re-enter care and how they can qualify. And I was just discussing with my with the business office here at Children and Youth today, because we don't, if a youth qualifies under multiple aspects, whether they're working and going to school, we don't sometimes take a main priority as the reason. We just take one of those to show proof or documentation of that. But I know in Dauphin we're trying to take a looser approach even to being able to re-enter care, and so to use it as that safety net and make it broader. So the question I had today, which I really wanted to pose to this group, was I have a youth right now, and she has some mental health issues, but she's working, and she's also trying to attend school. And so for me, the catch-all was the mental health. She's in a group home placement. I wanted to make sure that her mental health needs were being met, and that in case she did lose her job because of a stability issue, that she could remain in care with that qualification. And I actually got feedback saying, well, if she can work, then she doesn't really need that other qualification. And I thought, but in case she loses her job, we want her to be able to do that. So I think even giving information to children and youth agencies about trying to be as open as possible for youth in this age group of the 18 to 21 to make it as easy for them to stay in care as they can. I think that is a mentality that still needs to be overcome, that does seem to exist, and I think our courts can be a big help in that by, talking to the judges, talking to the guardians ad litem, and ensuring that they know to go with the best qualification for remaining in care as possible for a youth. So not to kind of pigeonhole them into one category and saying, well, you have to fit this one and so you don't get the other ones, and no, you don't get to stay in care. We really need to stay away from that, is my view of it. So that was really my perspective today. I know it's getting close to 1:45 and there are a lot of questions, but I can definitely, if there are any questions about court involvement or how to let your courts know things or keeping them engaged, I think having those open conversations in the courtroom with older youth is a great way to do that, to have that one-on-one discussion. We have the youth talk in court to see what's going on, and that engagement seems to have helped a lot in Dauphin County. So I hope that helps today.
That really helps, Marisa. I actually have a follow-up question for you, a couple actually. So in terms of pursuing like the double sort of meeting of the activity criteria, how would you help youth to prepare for that maybe in court? And just what are some general tips you might have for some advocates out there about how to best prepare older youth to advocate for themselves in court?
I do think that it's a really good idea to look at the qualifications and see. So if you do have a youth that has had a job for a long time but they want to go to school, it's easy to say, oh, well, it's the post-secondary education, but maybe not pick that one if they're not yet in school or there might be some issues there, and to stick with the job one for there. But I do know, unfortunately, a lot of foster youth do have other traumas in their lives, and so they're trying to address those too. So I do see the mental health one as more of a catch-all, and I try to be really encouraging to caseworkers and say, look, yeah, I understand this youth may be giving you problems, but that could be the result of multiple issues, not because they're just a general difficult person. So to go with the broadest category possible for the youth, and so for them to identify that, because it's easy sometimes to look at some of these kids and say, you know what, you're an adult, I give up, we've tried, and that's almost, people get to the end, and I don't think that should happen. I think this group is the most vulnerable for that to happen, and it has the worst consequences. So to make it as easy for them to stay in care until 21 and to get the services and things needed for them, I think is most important. And so for their advocates to realize that it may be better to argue for the other qualification for them to remain in care, or even to just explain on the record why they're justified to stay in care at this time, for the court to understand that. Because even actively seeking a job, trying to get into school, not necessarily having that yet, and also we try to only require, even if they're coming in for 3-month hearings, we only require giving the court documentation every 6 months, because it can sometimes be difficult, even if they're in school, if it's 2 semesters or whatever that is, they might not have documentation to give to the court. So we ask for it twice a year versus the 4 times a year, just little things like that can make a big difference for a youth that's trying is what it comes down to.
I just had a suggestion from one of our attorneys here at Juvenile Law Center that we look to California's model, which has a primary and secondary basis for remaining in care. So that might be something that we can look to for exactly what you're talking about making different cases for meeting the criteria.
Oh, that's really interesting. I'd like to hear more about that.
So we can get some resources and send it out to the full list of attendees. So thank you for that. I think Bruce actually had something that he wanted to say in response to what you're saying, and then we'll move on to Leah.
No, I just wanted to add, like, if the youth are given these options to stay in care, like, you know, even if they have a mental health issue or, you know, going to school, I think it's best for, like, staff or advocates to, like, really let them know, like, a lot of youth, like me being, you know, a former youth in care, I know that a lot of youth get enrolled in school just because of that reason and not actually wanting to be in school. So I think it's just like more advocacy amongst the adults in their lives to just, you know, let them know, all right, well, take it that next step. If you really want to go to school or you really want to work, someone to just be there to you know, walk them through steps so they'll be able to, you know, take that next step forward as far as, you know, working and, you know, getting their own place instead of relying on just being in school or having a disability or whatever the mental health issue just to stay in care. Because it's like,
sorry, go ahead.
Because it's like, you know, that's another way of crippling the individual, you know, making a, you know, transition on the adulthood.
So that just goes back to what a lot of our panelists have been saying about speaking with youth and making sure that they're actively involved in the transition planning and getting a sense of, you know, they're having different conversations with them where they trust and have, you know, comfort levels with you that they can talk about their different options and what their goals are and how they can best accomplish them. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Leah, who's an attorney at Kids Voice. She's their supervisor and conciliation coordinator.
Hi, my name is Leah Cullen. As was mentioned, I am a supervisor here at Kids Voice. I also had the great benefit of being a staff attorney here and a training coordinator for many years. And the population that I tend to work with the most, in addition to some of our standard youth in care, is the IL population, the transition age population, both those who are going on to school or post-secondary ed or training program, which is part of my conciliation coordinating duties, as well as many of our transition-aged youth who are resuming care or involving themselves in different IL services. So what I was asked to talk about today are a few things, but I'm going to start with Allegheny County's one-stop approach to engage older youth. So in Allegheny County, which is so resource-rich, I feel like we're so fortunate to have so many services and people really truly invested and interested in the success of our youth, took a look at how they were providing services to our independent living aged, transition aged youth. And historically, what has happened, or at least in this county, since about 2005, is that independent living aged youth have received mainly kind of case management services, where there were a few different independent living programs that would be assigned to the youth upon turning 16, provided they had been in care for at least 30 days, and that each program had different models and different ways of trying to engage the youth, to try to plan with the youth, and to try to get them to participate in programming some case management to advance the skills that they would have so that they'd be ready to depart, whether it was at 18 or at 21. What happened here is that Allegheny County, the Department of Human Services, which also oversees CYF, about 10 years ago created the Independent Living Initiative. And so it is separate from Children, Youth, and Families. It is its own entity under Allegheny County Department of Human Services, no different than the Office of Intellectual Disability, Housing, or Aging. And what they do is they really have aimed to determine what are the best practices and what can we do. So Allegheny County about 4 months ago, solicited proposals for the development of a youth center in a centralized location in Pittsburgh, whose services would be provided to our transition-aged youth ages 16 through 24. That would include our current and former foster youth and those who had not been involved but had been experiencing homelessness. The services in this one-stop shop would really be designed to help our youth face the challenges of adulthood, and mainly what they were aiming for them to address in this one stop was education, employment, financial literacy, housing, mental health and substance abuse, personal relationships, parenthood, and legal assistance. This was a huge endeavor and a huge commitment by Allegheny County. The RFP indicated that this was going to be up to 3 years with the option to renew, and the annual funding is in the range of $2.5 to $3 million. The Allegheny County Department of Human Services had a very diverse group of stakeholders involved in the RFP process to see the different proposals and to engage with the different parties involved to kind of come up with who they would determine should be awarded the RFP. Now, the announcement as to who has received the RFP has not come out yet. It's my understanding they're in the final stages of negotiating the contract, and hopefully it will be announced soon. But really, what this one-stop aims to do is to serve our IL youth in a way that is novel and is not the former kind of case management services that so many of our youth have become accustomed to. So the one-stop shop, how they came up with this idea for this serving clearinghouse was really looking about what had been emerging across the country as a more effective and appealing way to serve our transition-aged youth. In 2014, our Department of Human Services did a report on homeless youth, and many of the central recommendations and themes was to open a drop-in center in or near downtown Pittsburgh that could offer the services and supports all under one roof. DHS has a youth advisory board here in this county. It's called System Improvement Through Youth. It's SIPY. And they also discussed the concept of a one-stop center for youth. That youth advisory board for the RFP identified the services and resources that they would want to access at a centralized location. They were very specific that some of the things that they wanted in this one-stop was a space to exercise, dance, or to do physical activities, a space for the arts and creative pursuits, a kitchen where youth can learn to cook and share meals together. They also wanted some short-term childcare when teen parents attend workshops so that they were able to bring their children but didn't have to worry about juggling an infant or a toddler while they participated in services. They also wanted teaching stations where they could seek assistance for a variety of issues, anything from job readiness, employment, resumes, housing applications, educational exploration and assistance, and some post-secondary ed planning. And the youth also really wanted a drop-in center that would have someone that they could talk to, although not a therapist, kind of in the same way that they had received services in the past. You know, the hope was that this center could also serve as a home base where Allegheny County providers, such as nurses, employers, schools, and other agencies, could also go to engage youth. And for example, Kids Voice, which serves as the legal services agency that represents all of the youth adjudicated dependent in Allegheny County, will have space at the one-stop center so that we can engage with our clients, and we can also provide some of the expansion services that we are now doing at Kids Voice for our former clients who are transitioning out of care but may need some legal assistance to overcome barriers such as expunging criminal records or clearing up any landlord-tenant issues, also assisting them with Social Security applications or appeals, and doing other work such as just sitting down and reviewing their credit reports to see if there's some roadblock where some kinship or relative caregiver had used their name and information as a child growing up in the system that was now serving as a barrier to things like housing. The RFP for the one-stop really also talked about how they wanted this to run. They really want this to be accessible, youth-centered and driven, inclusive, recognizing that our population of transition-aged youth here in Allegheny County in that 16 to 24 range is a diverse group. The majority of our IL youth, about 63% in this range, are African American, while 26% are white. And our females slightly edge out the males at a little bit over 55%. Also identified as who we wanted to be inclusive in this one stop is our LGBTQ youth, where about 10 to 23% of the youth in the child welfare system are self-identifying that they would be a part of this group. They also wanted to make sure that whatever supports are currently involved with our youth, be it mental health, drug and alcohol, or intellectual disabilities, have a way to touch base and the youth can be reconnected to those individuals when they come in and they're available into the drop-in center. The drop-in center, I think, is going to be an amazing opportunity for Allegheny County to see whether this new way of providing services to our 16 to 24 group is more successful than what we've attempted in the past. Some of the barriers and the roadblocks we've encountered with these youth really has to do with youth engagement, and some of what was discussed earlier in the webinar by other speakers, just kind of overcoming some of the hurdles that you encounter with any youth who's in this age group, whether it's the high-risk behaviors, some of the decision-making that might not be the most thought through at the moment, and trying to make sure that they're looking at the whole picture and not just living minute to minute. Some of the other issues that I was asked to speak about is just the resumption of jurisdiction and the notice and promoting compliance with the criteria. I know that at Kids Voice, one of the things we did was a ton of outreach 3 years ago to make sure that all of the partners we knew about, whether it was the placements, the foster care agencies, shelters, group homes, local hospitals, and other agencies that serve this population, knew about the requirements for resumption and the ability to stay in care. Flyers were created and a lot of training and meetings occurred 3 years ago, and here we are 3 years later doing the same. Usually in the summertime, myself, along with our independent living child advocacy specialist, Rebecca Shafer, head out to different places to meet with different partners and talk to them about our transition-aged youth and the ability to resume. Now, in terms of how that works here in Allegheny County, we have really streamlined the process. Certainly, clients may call us. They may call Kids Voice. They may call CYF. And sometimes these youth are really just looking for phone numbers and contacts that they might have lost along the way. And it's not that every call we get from our former foster youth is a call requesting resumption. Allegheny County has also been really great about liaising with us when we get these calls to try to brainstorm and see what does the youth really need, because some of our youth do need to come back into care. I kind of think it's almost akin to flying across the country. Some of our youth need a layover. They need a place to stop over. They need to resume, have housing, have food, have clothing, have immediate access to services to stabilize themselves again before they move on to their next stop. In Allegheny County, I have to also say that for our youth who have resumed care, we have had youth who have resumed and been open only briefly. We have youth who have resumed and probably remain open since they started, since maybe for the last 2 to 3 years. These were youth who changed their mind shortly after the passage of Act 91. The other thing I would say is that we often, in terms of our relationship with the county, one of the things we saw immediately was the need for the caseworker, for CYF here, to immediately assign a caseworker to these resumption youth and not to just wait until the motion was presented and the judge made a decision. Because our youth who are resuming are usually in a very dire place. And so when we file our motion to resume jurisdiction, we also notice the regional office director of our intake department at CYF. He immediately assigns a caseworker so that an intake caseworker can respond to the youth and see what kind of crisis services, housing, or needs they may have, even leading up to the motion. And that's been incredibly critical, because some of our youth, by the time they are calling us, they are on the verge of losing or have already lost their housing. We've also seen youth resume care coming out of our local Allegheny County Jail, where they have been released and are in need of housing, and they've been able to come back in to stabilize and move on. We've had youth who have resumed more than once, and in fact, I think we have a frequent flyer who has come back in 3 separate times to kind of restabilize and go back out. We've seen very successful resumptions. We've seen youth resume care and get into some kind of school or training program, or successfully transition into their own apartment where they have employment. We had one youth who resumed into care after she reconnected with 2 bio siblings who were in a pre-adoptive placement. And after she reconnected with them via social media, she developed a relationship with the foster parents. She resumed care, and she was placed into the foster home where her siblings were being adopted. And that became a permanent placement for her, something that she had not seen when she had closed out prior to her 18th birthday. Most of the time, what we see as issues for our resumption youth really deal with mental health compliance. That's a huge issue, and that some of our youth really struggle to maintain some stability. Finally, I was asked to talk about how we engage youth through Allegheny County's way of casework practice, which is conferencing and teaming. And this kind of is also Allegheny County's new way of trying to deliver services and approach consumers so that they can be a part of the decision-making process, and not just have caseworkers who look at a family, deliver a plan, and tell them what they need to do. In these situations, Allegheny County is now moving to a practice where a meeting is held, where the family is invited, where they conference about what kinds of goals do they need to achieve in order to remedy the conditions that led to the dependency. Now, with our older youth who are in care, many of them, unfortunately, or our resumption-aged youth, don't have parents or legal guardians where they are having these types of conversations, because reunification is not their goal at this point. But our county is still looking at having these conferencing and teaming meetings so that they allow the youth to invite people that they view to be supports, that the youth then kind of dictates at the meeting what are their goals, how do they think they're going to achieve it. And one of the best things I think they do about this practice is, once the youth has laid out what it is they want to do, to look at them and say, and what if this doesn't work? What are your next steps? What's your plan B? And I really think that so often when you are allowing the youth to drive the process, but then also checking in with them as we would with any young adult in this age group, and say, and if this doesn't work, how are you going to handle it? Or what alternatives do you have? Really allows them to start thinking in a more global way and in a less linear way that kind of gives them other ideas as how to handle very real life situations that they may encounter in achieving their goals, and may have derailed them in the past. But now they may look at and say, this was not what I wanted to happen, but because it did, and because I thought through how I was going to handle it, I know who to go to and what my next steps are.
That's great, Leah. Thank you. There's a lot of nodding going around the table. I think we were agreeing with a lot of what you were saying. There's a couple of the different points. I just want to reinforce having checkpoints and reaching out to youth, making sure with stuff like flyers or training that they have knowledge of reentry and extension of care, that they're just literally aware of the possibility. And I think we're talking a little bit here about how you engage disconnected youth by figuring out what are some of the more almost we think of secondary needs, like the child care you mentioned, or transport, getting to where they can access these resources. Those are all things that we have to keep in mind. Also the opportunity for permanency and family that you mentioned. But I wanted to hand it over to Jess, who I know wanted to say something about the best way to engage youth by extension of care and reentry.
honest about what's going on in the future and not being afraid to have those really hard conversations about what's going on, because, I mean, we're not blind. We know that certain things don't work out, and also having early conversations about everything, so it's time, so you have time to plan.
And I think Bria had a question as well.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. I wanted to know how soon and how often do you transition plan with the youth, and how do you keep your resources updated? How do you notify the youth if a resource has changed or a number has changed?
Can any of our panelists, was that specifically for Leah, about how often you have transition planning meetings?
Well, so the transition plan meetings, I mean, obviously we recognize in Allegheny County that you need to have had a transition plan meeting within 90 days of an anticipated closure. However, the goal is that this is really something that should just be a part of a monthly meeting with youth. Because even if it's to check in to make sure, hey, the plan we talked about, we're still on track, anything we need to change. And I think that it's aspirational to say that I don't know that we're there yet, but I know that we're really trying to make strides, that on a more frequent basis, the check-ins are happening, as opposed to saying, oh my gosh, looks like this young adult's about to get an apartment, time to throw together a meeting. The other thing I might mention is that Allegheny County developed, they partnered and have a contract with, I'm not even going to probably be able to explain it right, a computer provider. And they have developed here in Allegheny County for our youth the Steel City Safe. And it is an online secured database that youth who are engaged in the process, 16 to 24, can store information or documents about themselves online in this shared space that only they have access to. So one of the things that we've seen our youth struggle with is that, maintaining the connections or holding on to their very important documents. And so this allows them and the partners they're working with, whoever they choose to allow access to upload to this secured server online where only they can access copies of their birth certificate, social security card, or even their transition plan, phone lists, names, numbers, results from family finding, anything that they think would be beneficial to kind of have as they move through, knowing that they're not always in the same place for a very long period of time.
Yeah, that sounds great. I know from experience in our office that having youth be able to access those documents readily would be a really, really big help. Just things come up that you really don't plan for, that you should be planning for in the event of just having them available. I'm going to encourage our audience to send in questions, but I was going to open up one question to all of our panelists. A lot of you talked about working with different stakeholders to ensure that all of youth needs are met. I was just wondering if you guys had any tips for how to engage a diverse group of stakeholders. Like, what kind of knowledge are you sharing with them? How are you making them aware of what older youth in care need?
We talk to a lot of people a lot of the time. I feel like it's 100 asks for every 3 or 4 gives. But if you can get 1 or 2 major stakeholders like a local hospital or universities involved, you then open up a larger network of people. But I think it just is a matter of persistence. And our best ally is the youth themselves. I believe it was Lisa that talked about the youth presenting to the staff. Whenever we do that, we are way more powerful than when we're out there by ourselves, because they just do a much better job of sharing their experiences and their needs than any of us could ever do.
Did anybody else want to speak to that point? No, I think Bruce also has a question or a point to add.
So, when speaking to youth, you know how you guys said, like, it's a little hard to get through to the youth on some situations, like earlier when Lisa was talking about, you know, the risk, the risk management, and any of the organizations, did anybody ever like think about bringing in like former youth that was in the same situations to actually talk to the current youth, you know, because they've been in that situation and they know a little more and they can relate more to actually ease them into, you know, talking about the more harder things so that, you know, they can document things and really get into the actual situations as far as, you know, them talking to an adult that they believe really don't understand what they're going through or don't understand, you know, everything that's going on.
So I'll add to that all three of our youth here today are part of our Youth Fostering Change Group, one of Juvenile Law Center's youth engagement programs that works to help youth who are currently and formerly in the foster care system. They choose one program for the year aimed towards improving the foster care system. And I know that in some of the surveys that we got back, a lot of people were looking for information about how best to get youth involved. Not only, and I think Bruce's point about youth advocates is a really, really good one. Do any of our panelists have anything to add on the issue of youth engagement and using youth advocates?
Well, this is Leah. I would say that, you know, in Allegheny County, we've also been real fortunate to have the Independent Living Initiative really support our former youth and utilize them for youth engagement. In fact, one of the programs that is in this county is the YSP program. It's a Youth Support Partner program. It operates like a partner or an agency, and our courts can assign youth to a YSP. To be a YSP, you have to have been a former consumer involved with either juvenile dependency, juvenile delinquency, maybe the mental health system under DHS. And so it allows young adults who have gone through and have seen the other side, who have proven successful, to match up with our youth in similar situations so that they can connect with them in a way that some of the other paid providers in this youth may not be able to. And I think that we have found that to be successful. I also have to say that Allegheny County Department of Human Services, the ILI group, have hired some of our former foster youth who have transitioned out of the system. They have hired them to serve as interns during the summer when they are home from school, and they have hired some who are not going to post-secondary ed, but some teen parents to be involved in some of the education in the teen parenting programs that they run. And I really do believe that even though we make our best efforts to go out there and spread the word and talk up how much opportunity is out there and available, that some of the best ways to engage current youth is to utilize a core of youth who have gone through the same.
Great, and I also wanted to just take a moment to thank Barbara Huggins, who's with the Youth Advisory Board as well, who's a big part of our videos. And I know she couldn't join us on the webinar today, but I definitely want to say thank you for all our help in this process. I do have a question here about resumption of jurisdiction, which I know a lot of people are curious about. So I'm going to put this out. When you do have youth who are requesting resumption and they don't immediately meet the Act 91 criteria, how does that happen in your counties? Do you guys want to give some pointers about how advocates and attorneys can handle that?
This is Leasia Ayer-Caswell. Here in our county, if we have a youth who has a plan to work towards meeting one of those goals, then we'll go ahead and proceed to request resumption. If it's going to take some time to do that and they need assistance immediately, then we will place them in one of our independent living apartments as an aftercare youth until we can get that closer to being a reality for them to meet one of the criteria.
Great. Anybody else want to talk on that point? I think another question that we have here is how to promote permanency and particularly connections with biological family members for older youth in care, how do we handle visits across the different counties? I think folks just want a sense of how that's being done and whether people have any advice for that.
Well, I can certainly say that, we have, it's interesting because in Allegheny County, many of our hearing officers and judges take the position that when a youth is over 18, there's very little in the way of ordering them who they can and can't see in our dependency proceedings. And so we do have many young adults who have the freedom and the ability and the community time to visit with parents and relatives or identified kinship relationships that they have established in their life. If anything, I have to say, allowing our youth the freedom to see and experience and have those family connections has been beneficial, to not have the strings attached in the same way as they may have been when they were under 18 in terms of when and where, the time, do they need to be supervised. Some of our young adults are able to learn and determine by themselves which of their family or kinship connections are positive resources for them, which of them are people that they can only visit, which of them they are only visiting during the daytime. I mean, really, our youth can develop skills about who and when they want to see as they continue to make good choices and maintain those relationships, recognizing that some of our youth have parents or family members or that still struggle with issues that might have led to their dependency.
Great. Do you guys have anything that you want to add?
This is Leah Weingartner from Valley Health.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Yep. I would just really echo Leah's statement, because I think that most of us had to learn how to manage our families. We maybe don't see it that way when we're going through it, but I think by allowing youth the opportunity and the freedom, you then allow them the opportunity to say, how do I want to manage it when my family is in need of money, or when my mom is using, how can I better balance my life? Because we all really manage our families those same ways, and it's not realistic to go from no contact to all the contact you want. It's just like any other life skill. You need to transition into it, and you need the support of others around you to do that.
Great. And I think just one final question, I think, maybe for whoever wants to speak to it. A lot of you guys have spoken today about creating this kind of culture shift and affecting not only, we're not just talking about the policy and the practice, but kind of the attitudes that people approach working with youth and getting them into placement and realizing that these just like any youth who have goals of independence and wanting to be out on their own. I just don't know if you guys had any final thoughts that you maybe didn't get to in your presentation or that you wanted to share on the idea of working with staff specifically to make sure that this culture shift happens.
Well, this is Leah Cullen again. I guess what I could say is that, personally I've really had the privilege of working with youth involved in our dependency system for the last 15 years. And I know that for many providers or representatives or advocates, some of our transition-aged youth can at times be some of our more frustrating population. But I have to say that I have seen such amazing outcomes for youth who are in this 16 to 24 age range, and that while there may be times where actions or decisions they're making seem frustrating, that the ability to work with these youth and to help them learn to manage the same things that we had to learn to manage when we were that age is really just an amazing experience. And so I think when you're talking about changing the culture, I think that when people have the ability to participate and work with these youth and see what can happen and see the good and the amazing. That is really almost akin to when we were talking earlier about having former foster youth talk to youth in this situation. When you're able to share that and the successes and what you see, and young adults making different decisions in their life where they may be making more forward progress to become producers and not consumers, really inspires, I think, those who are committed to work with these youth and really makes that shift in the mentality all the more easier.
Great, thank you for that. Does anybody else have anything to add? No? All right, I think we're going to start wrapping things up. I did want to leave you guys with just a couple of notes from our conversations with the youth here. Just some, because a lot of people were asking for just practical tips about how to go about working with youth. We've covered a lot of them, but I did want to say just know your stuff, be up to date with all your resources. And on that point, on Act 91 specifically, Juvenile Law Center has a very good resource page, jlc.org/fostering-connections, where we do have a frequently asked questions section that gets updated about the nitty-gritty of Act 91 and its implementation. We have the videos, as I mentioned earlier, and we have youth-friendly brochures and fact sheets on the law. They also wanted folks to know that not everything can be solved by a quick referral to somewhere else. And it's just going again with the same themes that we were talking about earlier, that it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence when it sounds like you're just trying to get something quickly done, when you're not sitting down with them and having those conversations and building those relationships. And then finally, the point that they definitely wanted to get across is and have the really hard conversations about the future. Like, youth are fully aware that at age 21, if it's at age 18 or age 21, that this transition to adulthood is happening at some point, and they know it's coming, so don't be scared to have the conversations, even if it's a hard conversation to have. They realize that it's not all going to be pretty, and they're okay having those conversations. And I think something that someone mentioned earlier that I wanted to make sure got across, it was a point for us in the videos, that youth don't have to stay in care. They should be aware of all the resources that they're able to access without being in the foster care system, and just having that as well in your arsenal. So respecting their decision, that it's their decision to remain in care, but making sure they're fully informed and aware of all the potential options at their disposal. That's pretty much what I had here. I don't know if anybody has any additional questions or comments that they want to make.
Just a few things I thought were really good ideas with Leah and Allegheny County, the one-stop shop from 16 to 24. I think the age range is a wonderful age range because we're actually trying to get better resources for older youth here in Philly. That was one of our suggestions for our project last year. We wanted help for youth 18 to 25. Also, being introduced to family members earlier on, not even just at 18, but earlier, so they have an idea of what they're getting into if they want to be discharged to family members. I think that was a brilliant idea. And the earlier the better is for, I don't know, that's as far as discharge planning or transition planning. These conversations, the earlier they happen and the more frequent that they occur, the better off the youth is.
I just want to make sure no one has any last couple points to end on. It's hard to speak if you're over the phone and can't see, so I just want to make sure I'm not cutting anyone off.
No, thank you so much for putting on this webinar. It's been really great to hear what the other panelists had to say, and always love learning about how people are working and engaging youth and getting them involved in making some good life choices.
I echo that. Thank you so much to all our panelists for your thoughtful insights and for taking the time we had and for being patient with our tech difficulties. That goes for all of our audience members as well. we do want this to be the start of a conversation, so we know that people might have, whether it's not during questions now, but if you do have feedback or you have specific questions about your county and how things can be done there or improved there, or you just want to share a really great story that you have, we're really open to hearing that. And so feel free to reach out to me at kmordecai@jlc.org to share those stories, and just let us know what's going on. We definitely want to be here in 3 more years, looking back on 6 years of Act 91 and thinking we've done a lot better in the last 3 years, and here's how we can do them better for the youth that we serve. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The webinar is done. Yes.